Hi, I'm Shana Meyerson with the Yoga Vor podcast, here today with return guest, legal scholar, novelist, and social commentator, Thane Rosenbaum. If you appreciate and find value in these important discussions, please consider supporting the show. Your donations ensure that I can continue to bring you such amazing and esteemed guests. Details are pinned in the comments below. It's October 7th, 2025. 2 years ago today, thousands of Hamas terrorists and thousands of innocent Gazan civilians flooded into Israel to bake babies, behead men, violently rape women, massacre Holocaust victims, and brutally kidnap children. Oh, and dismember kibbutzniks, declare open season on concert-goers, and burn down entire communities. Today, 48 hostages, both alive and murdered, remain in diabolical Hamas captivity, where they are starved, tortured, and manipulated as pawns in a sick game of psychological terror levied on Israel and the Jewish world. The world's response? Ho-hum, let's talk about dead Gazan babies. There's been a vile anti-Israel disinformation campaign frantically whitewashing the atrocities of 10/7, sometimes to the point of actual erasure. As we watch dangerous historical revisionism unfurl its blood-red carpet across the internet, the voices of those who keep the memories alive are those who will ultimately set the historical and moral record straight. Thane Rosenbaum is one of those voices. Thane, it is an incredible honor to not just have you on the show, but to have you back on the show. Thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you for including me. You are an important voice, and this is an important podcast in very dark times. So I will always show up if you call me.
Oh, don't. That's a very dangerous thing to say to me, Thane.
It just happens to be true, though.
Okay, well, I'll start calling you every day. That being said, in all seriousness, today is October 7th, 2025, the sad and somber 2-year anniversary of the 10/7 atrocities. I think that there's a moral consensus by now that the world has been more shocked and appalled by the global response to 10/7 than even the atrocities themselves. That being said, I'd actually like to start this conversation with what I see as today's, meaning October 7th, 2025's disgraceful response from both sides of the Israel debate. Namely, we see more people across the globe today shamelessly celebrating the 10/7 massacre than commemorating the tragedy of that horrific day. Thane, I'd like to know how do you view both of these dynamics, the loud and vicious inhumanity of the emboldened Hamas supporters versus what I see as the cowardly silence of the Zionists with the trembling knees?
Well, Shana, it's 2 years later, and it is mind-boggling that after 2 years, that one wouldn't immediately think that if you just told the story like, well, a terrorist organization crashed the gates of another country and attacked kids, either babies that were thrown in ovens or young girls and young men who were essentially hippies. They were hippies. They were the kind of people that show up at concerts like Coachella here in the United States. So if you're starting off, that's who the target was. A bunch of hippies, peaceniks who just spent the night dancing. And so therefore, of course, you use the words by any means necessary. Because if you don't use the words by any means necessary, you got a problem. Because you have to say, well, wait a minute, who did they attack? Soldiers? No. They beheaded women, they gang raped girls, they mutilated people, women especially. You know, how is it possible that on university campuses, which essentially would have been the self-identified peer group of the people at the concert, the same people that probably went to a concert that summer, and instantly turned on the kids, on the hippies, and said, we are going to root for the barbarians. Now, it's just mind-boggling. It's almost a Twilight Zone episode that, wait, I don't understand. You're rooting for the barbarians, the people that committed the crimes, terrorist organization that has a charter to kill Jews wherever they may be found. And so that's why we saw instantly the tearing down of posters, or the denial of the videos, or the denial of the rapes. It's because the focus was being shifted immediately toward the quote, poor Palestinians, which is a term of art, right? The poor Palestinians. All over the world, people who legitimately suffer and are not complicit in their own suffering. We don't call them poor Nigerians or poor Sudanese or poor Ethiopians. We don't give a shit about them. You know, the progressive world is only interested in the Palestinians because it gives them a green light to hate Jews. And that's why there's been an incredible, not just misinformation, but a misdirection. So it's tear down posters by any means necessary, genocide. I've been a law professor for 35 years. And as you know, my most recent book is Beyond Proportionality, Israel's Just War in Gaza. I know a lot about this stuff. This is my area. And I'm watching other professors who teach similar courses calling it a genocide. And I know that they know that it's not. I know that and some of them are Jews. I know they know that they have redefined a crime. They don't use the word war crimes. They don't want to use the word casualties of war because they don't like that word because it includes the word war. They don't use those words because they want to use the worst thing you can label what Israel's doing. It is completely misapplied. It is completely belied by the facts and by the fact that Israel's in a war. Israel is the only country that was in a war that people were actually calling a genocide. During the Holocaust was a war against the Jews in camps, and there was a war against the Allied powers. But this is one war, and yet Israel is being accused of a genocide. Why? Because there are casualties of war. Well, that's what happens in wars. Right. That's what happens when you start a war. So this is a situation where Hamas started a war and continued to promise that they would do it again and again and again. And I can tell you, as a law professor who's written a book on this subject, Israel is under no legal duty to stop at all. There should be no ceasefire. Why? Because the war was started by Hamas. The war never ended. Hamas is still recruiting members. They're still recruiting members. If the war is still on, Israel needs to fight the war to finish it. But again, we didn't allow Israel to win this war. From the very beginning, we used words like restraint or de-escalate, and we threatened Israel with charges of genocide. And by the way, people use the word, even the professors that use the word, the International Court of Justice in their very first evaluation specifically said, we do not find genocide.
Yeah.
We're going to keep looking at here, but in the meantime, we haven't. So again, it's 2 years in, we're still having these discussions. It's bewildering.
It's not just keep looking. They're looking for loopholes is what they're looking for. They're looking for new definitions that they could shove this into. But actually, Thane, I guess my question is, first of all, the depravity of people could not wait a day, that they had to go out and flood the streets to celebrate it. I remember on 10/7, because I went to Cornell, that I think his name was Rickford, some associate professor who was yelling that it was exhilarating and all the things. And it was so appalling. And now we have hundreds of thousands of people who have no compunction about screaming this in the streets on 10/7. But I do, but do you feel like any of the blame also lands on the silent majority who are not showing up to counter protest, who are not speaking up against this ignominy? Why can't I pronounce this? Ignominy? Like why do we live in this society where it's the people who are opposing terror who are cowed into shutting the F up?
You know, Shana, moral courage has always been in very short supply in humanity. This is not new. It's apparently very hard to do. And I know this because you see very little of it. And it requires moral courage to dissent from what's fashionable, right? The people that are screaming genocide can't find Israel on a map. They have no sense of the history between the Palestinians. They don't even know that the word Palestinian didn't even exist until the 1960s, that they were always referred to as Arabs from Israel or Palestine. They're Arabs. They actually all originate from Syria. There's no actual Palestinian people, but people don't know this. People don't understand that Palestinians have rejected 5 offers for statehood. They don't know this, and they don't want to know this because it's very self-condemning to go, wait a minute. You were offered a state 5 times and you're still screaming. So what are you really about? Well, what we're really about, which we don't like to say in public, is killing Jews and eliminating the Jewish state. We don't care about a Palestinian state. We wouldn't know what to do with it. We don't know how to use it. What we don't want is a Jewish state. We want the cities that now are occupied by Jews. We're not even interested in the land that you're offering us. So I just think that it's very fashionable now. We see that on red carpets, on the Emmys and in the Oscars. You hear the imbeciles out on The View. If you haven't read a lot of books, and most people haven't, and you're pretty stupid, most people are, and you really want to be popular and say the thing that'll get you invited to a party, why would you stand up for Israel? Why?
Because it's the good and decent thing to do. And the truth is, Thane, the real question should be, why is terror trendy? And that's really the sad and scary state of the world.
But remember, these are people that are calling Israel the terrorist state. So everything is upside down. They're saying that's why even the Secretary General of the United Nations, Guterres, initially said there's a historical context here, right? That was his way of justifying October 7th.
Right.
Well, you have an occupation. And what did you think was going to happen after all these years? Eventually, something like this was going to happen. That's exactly what the mayoral candidate of New York City is saying.
Yeah.
He's saying, I don't think people understand how much, Palestinians have suffered at the hands of Israelis. And so Israel's now simply getting what it deserves. So they don't see it that way.
Yeah.
And they're not being taught that way on campus or in mainstream media or in publishing or at museums. So if you look at where are the communication centers are pretty united. Israel is the bad guy. Hamas are resistance fighters. The Palestinians are the victims. And you never question the moral integrity of a brown-skinned person anymore. If you're brown-skinned, you have automatic virtue by virtue of your skin. And if you can designate Israelis white oppressors, you have the DEI agenda and protocols in place. And so it's pretty simple. I don't think they have a hard time justifying this. You have a hard time accepting it, but in their mind, it's pretty straightforward.
I have to ask you a personal question then, Thane. Let's go with that. Let's go with the Mamdani theory, right? That all of these fake atrocities and in oppressions that don't exist, but let's pretend they do exist, and therefore this is the only logical outcome. So I want to ask you something very personal, Thane. What would I have to do to you to drive you to behead my father, rape my mother, kidnap my sister and then burn my baby alive. Like what could I possibly, like what threshold, what's the threshold that would drive you, a normal and decent person, to do that, since it's so inevitable according to this argument?
Well, that's the reason why they were pulling down posters. That's the reason why they didn't want to watch the videos. That's the reason why they said that the IDF raped Israeli girls. This is why they created this levels of absurdity. Why? Because they don't want to face the question that you're asking. In my book, I actually asked that Shana Meyerson question. I say, what could Israel have possibly done to have justified October 7th? I go through clearly, if you actually think there's a legitimate need for resistance, you then have to say to yourself, all right, what did Israel actually do to deserve this? And the answer is nothing. They're building their own country in their ancestral homeland, where they are exercising their self-determination and have never started a war with any of their neighbors. So no, they've made offers for land for peace. No country on this planet has given away more of its land, right, in order to achieve peace. The peace treaty with Egypt required the return of the Sinai Peninsula. Israel had built hotels there. There were oil wells. They gave all of that back for peace. So Israel is the only country on the planet that doesn't set the terms for surrender, but is required to sue for peace.
Even now, when the world is still asking Israel to return the land that they won in a defensive war in 1967. And people are like, oh, yeah, no, that's totally reasonable. I mean, when the war between Ukraine and Russia ends, Crimea is not going to be returned. It's not expected to be returned. Nobody expects it to be returned. That's not how war works. But 67, 77, 87, 97, 50 years later, they're still hanging on to, oh no, Israel owes us 67 borders, which, by the way, have more or less, as you mentioned, already been offered. And if the Palestinians were so desperate for a state, not to mention that they already have one, it's called Jordan. I'm like, what's it called? And they have a bunch in Lebanon as well. If they really wanted a state, people have to understand, it's not just they didn't accept the offer, which was for 97% of what they wanted under Olmert, plus the rest under land swaps that they got to choose, and a capital in East Jerusalem. Their answer wasn't even negotiations. It was intifada. If they actually wanted a state, what nation on earth would possibly in any world turn that down?
Well, they're not interested in nation building. What you just said is the best example. So, for instance, during World War I, before the British Mandate was established, where Great Britain, took over what was then Palestine and a number of other Arab countries under a provisional, temporary arrangement under the League of Nations, where it would be a protectorate that they would eventually return the land. At that time, the idea was that there would be a Jewish homeland. That was where the Balfour Declaration. And do you have any idea what they contemplated that size of that country? That country included Jordan, Israel, Gaza, right? I mean, it was a huge country.
Yes.
But then there was the white paper, which created Jordan. And then there was the partition plan, which carved out a much, much smaller Israel in order to create land for Palestinians, which means essentially Israel was taking over 1/3 less land than it had thought it would receive. And even more so if you consider what land ultimately became Jordan. And the Israelis, instead of blowing themselves up or bombing people or slitting the throats of children or taking people in wheelchairs and throwing them off of cruise ships like Palestinian Liberation Organization did, they accepted a much smaller country and said, you know what, we'll take what you're offering us and watch what we do for this in the next 80 years. Watch what we do. Watch us build a nation.
A
The Jews
miracle, not
proved
just a
that they
nation.
could be nation builders. And the Palestinians have proven that they like to be nation destroyers. They like to blow shit up, including themselves. And that is just a hard truth. You know, that is not even a debate.
Yeah.
Just look at the facts. They reject offers of statehood. No amount of land is enough for them. And when you compare to Israel, could have stomped its feet and said, wait a minute, the Balfour Declaration offered us a huge country. And the League of Nations accepted that partition. So the League of Nations accepted a very large Jewish homeland. Why are we stuck with tiny Israel? You know what? That's a terrible, there's no good answer for that. It's anti-Semitism again. You have 22 failed Arab states, and everyone has failed under any, measure of success. The rule of law, free speech, pluralism, freedom of religion. They're all failed states. But one Jewish state needs to be really tiny. But Israelis accepted that and built that. And so, it's the answer is very simple. You just look at the facts. The problem is people don't want to look at those facts. They don't want to know those facts because it's much more convenient to say, do we have a green light to kill Jews right now? Well, let's use it. Can we frame the killing of Jews as a matter of social justice? Wow, that's awesome. That we can take traditional anti-Semitism and give it a human rights component. Wow, that's cool. And so that's what we've been experiencing for years, and we've seen it projected all over the world for the last 2 years.
I think that for anybody who is listening to this, particularly who isn't Jewish, like that just is such a mind-blowing concept that it's easy for them to blow that off. But Thane, what I want to do is really focus on today, and we'll go broader, but is to focus on how history is writing itself as we speak, and how it's also being rewritten in what I see as very, very dangerous ways in real time. So I'm going to ask for literally like brief outline, cliff notes, as short as you can, just so people have some context. If you, Thane Rosenbaum, were given the opportunity to scribe the last century, just the last century of Jewish history, what would you include? I know, how do you make that a short answer? But just to highlight real for people who don't understand sort of how we got.
I would say, very short, if you're taking notes at home and you're scoring at home, and Thane Rosenbaum is giving you a little homework assignment, look up the Dreyfus Affair in France. It may have started in the 19th century, but most of it went into the 20th century. Then move to the Holocaust. Then move to the birth and in the aftermath of the Dreyfus Affair, you have Zionism, which clearly was motivated by the Dreyfus Affair. Then you have the Holocaust and the creation of Israel. The creation of Israel, immediately on its first day of announcing its independence, was attacked by 5 Arab armies. That's day one. Welcome to the civilized world, Israel. Welcome to the family of nations. 5 Arab countries will attack you. That war was shockingly won by the Israelis. They didn't have an air force, right? They were using secondhand weapons from Czechoslovakia. So when people say Israel's been supported by the United States military, you don't know what you're talking about. You're a moron. Don't you ever get tired of being a moron? Israel was not receiving help. In the Suez 1956 war, Eisenhower was not on Israel's side. He was the one stopping Israel from going further to defeating the Jordanians, the Syrians. So it's just not true. It's just none of this is true, but most people are so ignorant, they don't know. So then you have a second war, the Suez War. Then you have a third war, the 6-Day War, with Israel won in 6 days. But again, wars precipitated by the agitation, military threats from their Arab neighbor states. There were no Palestinians. Those wars were fought by Arabs against the Jews, Arab states against the Jews. Then the Yom Kippur War, right? There's a pattern, right? The most ugly thing you can do, will do. We'll attack you on the holiest day of the year. Then what did we do? We killed your Olympic team. These are all things that should be on your list. Put it on your list. We slaughtered your entire Olympic team. Then we have engaged in years of terrorism, whether it's the hijacking of planes, the killing of the team, hijacking of cruise liners, killings around the world perpetrated by the PLO. And then you have this other extraordinary thing, which is that Israel actually returned one of the disputed territories. Didn't have to, it did. That's where Hamas develops the launching pad. That's where Hamas was able to create the tunnels. If Israel had not withdrawn in 2005 from Gaza, there would be not 400 miles of tunnels. There would not have been weapons delivered from Iran. So Israel withdraws from Gaza, and then there are 3 wars started by a terrorist organization against Israel. So while Israel developed a relative calm with its Arab states, its new theater of war was against terrorists, not against states. And so we forgot that these last 3 wars that Israel's been in, 2008, 2014, and 2023, are wars against a terrorist organization. And so here we are now in the 23rd century. That covers some of that period. But then there's one more piece to this that you have to add, which is despite all of those obstacles and warring factions trying to eliminate the Jewish state, Israel has been an extraordinary success. And this drives people insane. It drives them insane. They're sitting on boxes, holding on to keys to homes in Tel Aviv they're never going to get back. Their kids are illiterate. All they know how to do is slit throats or fly kites that have tails with fire on it, right? When you say, oh my God, all the innocent civilians. Well, yeah, they're not innocent, and none of them will be Nobel Prize winners in chemistry. That's just not going to happen. Does that mean they should be killed? No, but it does mean that let's be honest about who they are. This is who they are. You may not like the implications of what I said, but they are barbarians, and they've only been taught to do one thing: spill Jewish blood. Meanwhile, somehow, miraculously, Jews not only defended themselves in these wars, but have won a disproportionate number of Nobel Prizes in medicine and chemistry and physics, which is extraordinary. Your iPhone would not exist without the Israelis. So the level of technology, the level of success, the level of innovation is extraordinary. And you cannot dismiss or minimize this, Shana. This has a lot to do with it. It is the rage and resentment against these Jews. How can they continue to succeed after so many centuries of people trying to eliminate them, and they still show up more resilient and more successful? Why are we still sitting on boxes? Well, maybe, just think about it. If you could teach your child not to slit throats and to study calculus. I remember I was on I-24 years ago. Remember when the Hamas was having those, what they call them, something of rage, days of rage.
Yeah.
Days of rage. On Fridays, they would protest outside the walls.
Yep.
And I remember one time when I was being interviewed, one of the anchors, Michelle McCory, I remember her name, a lovely woman. She said something about the days of rage. And I said, I'm just going to quote to you what one of the Palestinian Hamas leaders said. The children do not go to school on Fridays. They go instead to participate into the rebellion at the day of rage. And I'm thinking, that's your problem. There you go. There you go. Your kids should be in school. There you go. You've already you've established the wrong precedent. You've trained them to be martyrs. You've told them the only thing that matters is to be a martyr. And you've told them not to go to school. No Israeli parent is telling their kid not to go to school. And that's the story. And that I just framed it. You can look it up. It does.
Yeah.
Mainstream media may not describe it this way, but it is what it is. It's easily discoverable. Just look it up.
Yeah. Another thing that no Israeli parent is teaching their kids is to slit throats of anybody, or commit atrocities. Two things I would add to that brief history of a long and sprawling 100-year history would be the Hebron massacre of 1929.
Yes, excellent.
There
Good.
was a
What
Jewish
good
state.
And
Yeah.
why? You know why that's important? Explain to your viewers. It's important because in 1923, right? There was no Israel. There was no even sense that Israel would get created. At that point, it looked like the British were going to renege on their promises. So it didn't even look that there would be an Israel. And guess what happened? The Hebron massacre.
Yeah, which didn't look, I mean, it wasn't as vicious as 10/7, but it neither was it more than a stone's throw away from the same. Another thing I would add though, Thane, is the first and second Intifada, because people need to know about the Intifada because it's what they're calling for in our streets.
Good point. Big
So
oversight on Thane. I
if
left out. I left out both intifadas because you know why this is important?
yes,
Because people like the mayoral candidate wants to sanitize the word intifada. Oh, it doesn't mean that. Oh, it doesn't mean that. It just means struggle. Oh, no, no, no. And I'm saying there isn't any Arab in the world or Muslim in the world that doesn't know intifada means killing Jews. So if you're, and we know this because the first and second intifada were violent rebellions. And the second one required Israel to build the fences because of the suicide bombing. So it's so ugly and gross when anyone goes, globalize the Intifada. All that means is I want to support Palestinian rights. No, it doesn't. It doesn't mean that. And I use this example many times as a law professor and someone who's written a book on the First Amendment. If I was on campus screaming, lynch blacks, lynch blacks, lynch blacks, I would be kicked off campus, as I should be. And I would never be returning. And I wouldn't be able to say the following. Well, Shana, I don't mean kill blacks. I mean, I'm really opposed to racial preferences. But this is how I express myself.
right.
This is what I say. I don't mean that. And that's exactly what we heard on campus. It's what we heard from the mayoral candidate in New York, that the word intifada is pretty innocuous. It's sanitary. It just means I support Palestinian rights. Instead of saying, no, we have video of what happened in the first intifada and the second intifada, which required closing off, creating walls, was called security fences, because of your intifada, which you claim is peace-loving, when in fact it means one thing and one thing only, the killing of Jews.
That's right. I do want to focus on really the historical significance of this latest war because it has deep and sprawling implications way beyond the day or even the 2 years that have unfolded since. I mean, to me, October 7th, I mean, it sort of feels like yesterday. I mean, we still have 48 hostages that are in Gaza, and there's this bleeding in gaping wound, I would say, in like the entire like collective Jewish soul, as long as these 45 hostages, keeping in mind that 26 to 28 are presumed even dead, but as Jews, our hearts and souls still shatter and bleed and cry out for the return of these lives. And I'm wondering, Thane, as a historian, is this kind of like communal empathy unique to the Jewish people? Have we ever seen I honestly, I was too young to really remember the Iranian hostage crisis, but even as a kid, I don't remember every day walking around the way you do in Tel Aviv and seeing stickers and reminders everywhere, and the whole country is still paralyzed by it years later. And is this unique to the Jews? And if so, why?
Well, I'll tell you why. One thing that's unique that people aren't really talking about, Israel's never been in a war for 2 years.
That's true.
Israel's been in a 6-day war. The first war against Hamas, you know how long it lasted? 10 days. You know, the second war in 2014, less than 3 weeks. This war has been 2 years. So the prolonged nature, and Israel in all the other wars, under a month. So, you know, Israel's not used to being in a prolonged war. So that has a lot to do with it. And the hostages are part of the prolonged nature of this war, that and the Biden administration, which really did not allow the Israelis to unleash the full scope of its wartime potential. That, and in fact, a tremendous security breach that the Israelis really did not know there were 400 miles of tunnels. They had no knowledge of it. It's shocking. I don't know how that's possible, but the tunnels changed the nature of the war. Without the tunnels, this wouldn't have lasted 2 years. Without the Biden administration, it wouldn't have lasted 2 years. And without the hostages, right? Because Israel wanted them back. And as you know, Hamas is great with agony, you know, the trickling out effect. That's why when I was on doing media last week, I knew that they would not, they don't care what Donald Trump's deadlines are. First it was Friday night, then it was Sunday night. Well, now it's Tuesday night, you know, and I'm surprised that Donald Trump isn't saying this is just nonsense. I said Friday, then I said Sunday. Now you've embarrassed me. Netanyahu, finish it off. And I'm surprised that that hasn't happened. It just shows you how desperate the Israelis are to get some of the living back and to get the bodies of the dead. Hamas knows this. Hamas has no incentive to agree to anything. The plan that Trump has unveiled, they don't care that the world is behind it. Even the Arab world is behind it. They see that this plan offers them no room in their governing party. There's no seat at the table for Hamas. So if they have to demilitarize and they can't be part of the governance of Gaza, and they're not afraid to die, what are we offering them? Amnesty? They don't care. They don't care about their own lives. They don't care about the lives of their families. They don't care. I know this is difficult for, you know, progressive Westerners, people that I know. They're going, well, that's not true. No, it is true. Sometimes you have to believe what people tell you. I know that you don't know anyone like this on Park Avenue or in Shaker Heights or in Brentwood. I understand you don't know people, but that doesn't mean there aren't people like that. And that's what they believe. So I do think that what the nature, the prolonged nature of this war, the agony, has a lot to do with what you're describing. The second thing I would say is something that I didn't say when I mentioned the Dreyfus Affair. The reason I started with the Dreyfus Affair is because in my book, Saving Beyond Proportionality, I start with the Dreyfus Affair. Why? Because the Dreyfus Affair was a global story where the world was debating the situation of Jews and whether they're traitors, whether they can be trusted. Artists were debating. There were people divided between Dreyfusards and anti-Dreyfusards. And by the way, there were more Dreyfusards then, people in support of Jews, than there are now, right? The world sort of mobilized against Israel. So I think that what's happened around the world has also dictated the attitude of Israelis. Why? Because they're saying, shit, there isn't the slightest empathy for us at all. Look what's happening. I mean, look what happened in Manchester, Shana. On the day that 2 Jews were killed in the morning of Yom Kippur, by nighttime, there were rallies against Israel in Manchester. By that nighttime, that the people of Manchester, and this just shows you how far gone the United Kingdom is. This is nothing is more, you know, grotesque that Yom Kippur had not even ended, but before the end of Ne'ilah services, there was already protests against Jews and supporting the death of Jews. So, you know, if you're an Israeli, you know, this is a, you know, you knew that the world hates us, but you never knew that the world hated us that much. And this is the problem that I have with Western Jews, which is to say, what is it about the last 2 years that you did not understand?
That's right.
What are you looking at? So I can't tell you, some of my best friends who I love but are idiots, they say stupid things. I have a lot of stupid friends, but they, I love them, but they're just stupid. They say things like, my daughter's married non-Jews, so we're safe. They say things like this. I don't have anything in common with the religious Jews of Israel, to which I say, Israel is a secular country. How stupid are you? Israel is not a religious country. So I'm saying Jews have gone out of their way to step back and say, this has nothing to do with me. And so that hasn't helped. It's not just Hollywood Jews, it's all Jews. Everyone is somehow coming up with an excuse was, well, Israel's not blameless. Well, there are academics who study such things, and this is what they're saying. Or my son just came. I mean, I know people that say, my son just came back from college and told me that Israel's all at fault. And I haven't read a book, but I don't want to read a book. So I'll just listen to what my son said.
Right.
So it's shocking to me how poorly, Jews themselves have stood up for Israel and for themselves. They see attacks in major cities throughout the United States, Canada, Melbourne, all throughout Europe, the Parisian Jews since 2005. Since 2005, I used to travel the country and the globe talking about what was happening to the Jews of France. And Jewish communities would look at me like I made it up. They would say, well, you're a novelist. That's probably in your next novel. And I'm saying, do you people have any idea about anything other than how to renovate a kitchen? Because I know Jews have gotten very good at renovating kitchens, but do you know anything other than renovating kitchens? You don't know what's gone on to the Jews of Europe. You don't care. So again, it's shocking that even you're not watching it from afar. You're watching it up close. Yeah. You're watching people on Times Square screaming, death to the Jews. You're seeing Jews burned in effigy. You're seeing globalize the Intifada, and you're saying, well, I don't think that has anything to do with me.
Right.
I'm saying for all the talk of the Berlin Jews not getting it, nothing has been more obtuse than Western Jews over the last 2 years.
I 100% agree. In fact, just sort of going back to a point that you made just a little bit earlier, is that I actually wrote a Substack about this recently, is that one thing that really, really scares me about all this normalized cultural Jew hatred that's taken over Western civilization is not just the threat from the unrighteous among the nations, but as you say, from among our own nation. I mean, Thane, there's only like somewhere between 15 and 16 million. If people don't understand numbers, there's about 8 to 9 billion people on Earth. So we're talking about 0.02% of the world. We have about 15 or 16 million Jews on Earth today. Many of them are already disengaged, they're secularized, they're completely disaffected, as you mentioned, and this is before October 7th. So on one hand, October 7th really did, if I were to say that there was a good thing that came out of October 7th, it really did galvanize like a certain segment of global Jewry back to their roots, their core values. I mean, they actually called them October 7th Jews, that they came back to Judaism and Zionism. Michael Rappaport would be a perfect example. But this other segment that you just discussed, they're running as fast as they can in the other direction. And we see this from the as a Jews, as a Jew, I just want to say that I'm against the genocide. To the, I'm not really a Jews. I was just born this way. I personally see this as like a real demographic crisis for the future of Am Yisrael, meaning the broader nation of Jews, both in Israel and the diaspora. I'm curious, because you have like a really good finger on like the psychological pulse of humanity. I'm wondering if you think that these Jews who are deliberately distancing themselves from their own people are doing it out of fear or self-loathing?
That's Jews have never been good at this, even from Mount Sinai. The golden calf is a very good example of Jews simply saying, yeah, what have you done for me lately? I'll go with this guy. I'll go with this guy. Maybe he knows. Again, this is a long history of Jewish complicity in their own suffering.
Yeah.
And again, lack of moral courage. But one thing that is very true now that I think was less true in these other stories, which is not being discussed, is the utter failing of Jewish leadership. Yes, it's true that the majority of Jews are either ignorant or passive or self-loathing or simply, living in a delusional world. But they also maybe could be rallied if there was Jewish leadership. But there isn't any. Chuck Schumer, Jerry Nadler, Adam Schiff. There are Jewish public officials that have been, in my view, disgraceful. The American Jewish Committee, the ADL, the ADL for sure, kowtowed to the progressive movement and then was shocked to discover that the progressives rejected Jews, as if there was any thought. Remember, the ADL was creating the DEI curriculum for schools. That means that their fingerprints were all over the DEI methodology, which hated Israel, hated Jews, and called Jews white oppressors. So, where there's no Jewish leadership, when someone was saying to me, I was on some program once and I said, during the Holocaust, some people knew of Peter Bergson, who was one of the people trying to rally Jews for the Holocaust, senators, there were some congresspersons. FDR didn't care, but there were public officials that tried to rally support. I just don't see that. It doesn't really exist. So if you think of Jewish legacy institutions, and if you look at Jewish public elected officials, you see them pretty passive, not outraged, not, and if you're describing Michael Rapport, I have to say he's a lovely guy. I don't know him, but that's not a good example of Jewish leadership, right? And even the other Hollywood people, they all have one thing in common. They don't have shows on the air. Their careers,
they have nothing to lose.
They have nothing to lose. They don't have a publicist telling them, don't do this, don't do this. They don't have a studio telling them, don't do this. So whenever I hear this, I go, Deborah Messing, Juliana Margulies, they don't have a show, so I'm not saying they're not sincere. They are sincere and they should be commended as people that were prepared to stand up for their people in the absence of other people. But where is Steven Spielberg and where is Barbara Streisand and where are people who have much bigger voices, much better platforms, people who run studios in Hollywood? For all the talk about Jews controlling Hollywood, how was there 4,000 people signed the letter boycotting Israel? These were Hollywood people. Weren't they afraid they would lose their job from all the Jewish control? Don't the Jews pull the levers? How can there not even be 4,000? There should have been 4. If there were Jews controlling Hollywood, and by the way, I signed the other letter from what is it? Creative Community. I forgot, which only had generated 1,200, and the names were those names, the ones I just gave you, Sasha Baron Cohen. So if you look at the list that was signed boycotting Israel versus the list supporting Israel, it certainly does not look like Jews control Hollywood. So clearly Jews do have some power, but they're reluctant to exercise that power for all sorts of reasons that have to do with self-preservation and self-interest. And because they don't make the connection. They don't, I don't ever mention my children, but I can tell you of them, I have daughters, and I never mention their names. They don't even have the same last name because I understand the career that I have, and they do not fight this fight because because of their father. I want them to live a normal life. But I can't get over the fact every day when I go on Instagram or Facebook, I see the faces of daughters who were killed, mass raped and killed. I'm haunted by those faces. Shana, every night I see them. They come up on Instagram, the algorithm knows what I'm interested in. So it gives me what I want. Honestly, I don't want it.
Right.
It has clearly affected me in an unhealthy way. But I get this every night. And I have had arguments with friends. And this is what I always say. But you have 3 daughters. But you have a daughter. And these friends of mine look at me like I'm insane. They don't make the connection. They don't see, well, my daughter doesn't get mass rape. I don't know what they're thinking. They don't see, they see what happened in the Nova Festival as another planet. And instead they should say, oh shit, I have daughters. That could have happened to me.
Yeah. I 100%. And I do want to say, first of all, Michael Rappaport's defense, and also I don't think anyone's ever called him lovely ever before, but he has made the point. He's like, I know where I am on the Hollywood totem pole. I should not be the one who is the leading voice.
Well, that's what I mean by lovely.
Right. But he actually admits that.
But that's what I mean by lovely, that he's very self-aware.
Yeah.
And maybe that's not the right word, but I mean, this is a guy who doesn't think he's Judah Maccabee. He's looking for Judah Maccabee. He wants to help out Judah Maccabee.
Yeah.
So that's what I mean by him. He's not acting as if he can fix it. David Schwimmer isn't acting like I'm the guy.
Yeah.
And I don't know whether David Schwimmer says, shit, if Friends was still on, would they let me do this?
Right.
The #1 show in the world, would they have let me? That's the problem. The problem is Jews are saying to themselves, what is the risk?
That's right.
You know what they're also saying? I don't want Thane Rosenbaum's life.
Yep.
Who wants to do that?
Yeah.
This is now my 3rd university.
Yeah.
My new book is not being sold in any bookstore in America. You can only get it online. Who wants that?
Yep.
Why not just, keep my head down and say, Israel is the greatest human rights violator in the history of the world, worse than the Nazis, worse than the Huns, worse than everyone. And maybe people will give me fruit cup at lunch.
Yeah, Thane, believe me, I'm in the same club as you are.
I'm sure.
I'm one of, if not the only person in the entire yoga world of 300 million people.
I can imagine.
Who has committed myself fully, but most of the people who support Israel, who I know, will only DM me about it. They would never in a million years post about it or like it in public. And
maybe I'm giving your audience an idea. And I'd appreciate this if they pick up on this. I get letters from people all over the world. Someone wrote me from Australia telling me how great the book is. But they also say something else that I didn't know, I shouldn't say, I just didn't think about. They're afraid to leave an Amazon review.
That's right. Yeah.
This happens on Facebook. People support when it's my birthday.
Yep.
Hundreds, if not thousands of people wish me happy birthday. But my weekly essay, it's the same 50 people every week.
Yeah.
They don't want their cousin to see their name, or their roommate or their son to see their name supporting a pro-Israel writer. So I can see that, people are saying, I'm with you, but I'm only going to whisper it.
That's right. That's right. I mean, it shouldn't be that I had to sacrifice my career to stand up against terror. I mean, the thought of it, Thane, most days I feel like I'm going insane, and I'm hardly exaggerating, because my mind goes in circles trying to figure out, how did we get here? How did we get here? How did we get here? How is this possible? How did we get here? How did the community of love and light decide that a terrorist massacre is justice by any resistance, and that they should go out and support that, and that they should, you know, call me? And by the way, like, if I do a show thing that is literally just about anti-Semitism, nothing else, just about the dangers of anti-Semitism, the comments will only fill with vile anti-Semitism, thereby proving the actual point that I'm trying to make.
Welcome to my world.
Yeah. I mean, for anybody who thinks that that's fun, just know I just block and delete, block and delete, block and delete, which is why I have no comments, because that's all that's left. It's like the United Nations. Once the terrorists leave the room, there's nobody left. It's just Bibi and the Americans, basically. And it's just, people are like, well, I can't sacrifice my career like that. And I understand that. Believe me, I've been living off savings now for 2 years. But it's been worth it. This has been the most amazing experience of my life, to be able to stand up for my people and to have conversations like this with people like you. But again, it should never be that you have to choose between standing up for what is good and moral in this world, to stand against evil, or save your career. It's an impossible and in quite honestly socially pathetic choice. I feel like we are living in indisputably historical and in perhaps even biblical times beyond Israel. I'm just talking about this epoch that we're living through. The rising tide of, it's absolute evil. It's absolute evil. And it's coupled with the all too familiar demon of anti-Semitism plaguing the entire globe, but most frighteningly, the West. There are parts of the globe that I would expect this from. I wouldn't be shocked that there, are people in whatever, fill in the Muslim country that are having these calls for intifada. But if you had told me on 10/7 that this would be happening in Sydney and London and Paris and New York, which, by the way, only had to wait less than a day to figure out, I wouldn't have believed you. Anyone who's paying attention, as you've already said, cannot possibly miss this. Like, how can anybody fail to connect these blinking neon dots that are circling the globe? Anybody paying attention?
Well,
Why aren't people paying attention?
Well, one reason is because they don't know anyone like that. They just, they don't actually know people. Like, for instance, I've written about this for years now. The problem in Europe and Australia and Canada are Islamists.
Yes.
In America, it's progressive Islamists. It's the Red-Green Alliance. Yes. But if you look at Europe, this is an immigration problem. The violence was imported. Arab Muslim violence was imported to Western countries. These attacks, sponsored by Iran, paid for by Qatar, these are not native Europeans, or they may have been born in Europe, but they're first generation. This is the Islamist playbook playing out in Western cities. And so when you see countries like France and England and Canada recognizing a Palestinian state, I've written about this in my essays. The reason for that is because they have an immigration problem. And they know that they have a lot of crazy Muslims that are violent, that do not write op-eds. They know that the Islamists that are there, the stuff that's going on in mosques is violence, the planning of violence. And they're scared out of their minds. Mm-hmm. And they know that Jews, as you pointed out earlier, don't train their children to slit throats. And the leaders of many of these Western countries say, yeah, but Muslims do teach people, their kids, to slit throats, and I don't want my throat. There was two members of parliament that resigned because of death threats, one of whom was stabbed and I think killed. You can look this up. This is not hard to find. Somebody resigned and he said, well, because of my politics, I saw what happened to my colleague on this side of the aisle, and I don't want to be killed. And their faith, you talk to most American Jews, they don't know people like that, right? They don't know that this is actually what's gone on in Europe and in Canada and Sydney, where the governments have surrendered their country. They have surrendered their country to the violence of Islam, and they don't know what to do about it.
Yeah.
And they've decided to trade off. They go, there are fewer Jews in this country than there are Muslims. It's not even close. And while it's true, Jews contribute to society at much greater levels, I would like my head not to be cut off. And that would be my preference. Yeah. And so that's what you have. It's not clear. Yes, some of these are labor, leftist governments that believe in the sort of white man oppression theory. Mm-hmm. But why the violence has continued against Jews is because they don't want to admit the problem. They don't want to admit that they have an immigration problem, that they have allowed far too many people whose vision of the world is fully incompatible with liberal values and democratic governance, and they will not in any way cohere or integrate within society. They will insist on a Sharia state. They will insist on little no-go zones. And we're seeing this being played out even more so over the last 2 years because the war in Gaza gave them a pulpit to explore their violence. And so I think they scared the shit out of Europeans. Some of the Europeans are fighting back against this. They want their country back. But unless they're prepared to have a mass deportation of illegal immigrants and other immigrants who literally, you're saying, based on your behavior and your social media postings and the shit that you say, and we've been looking at you, we check you out, you're insane. You're obviously you're a lovely person in your society, but you can't live here because if you need to buy in to what it means to be part of a British democracy or a French democracy or an Italian, you have to buy in. And since you won't do it, and since you are insisting on a caliphate, you got to go. You really need to go. Nothing personal. You need to go. And that there are very few political leaders that are willing, again, have the moral courage to say what I just said. Yeah. We'll pack your bag. We'll give you some, but you must go because you have destroyed Europe and you are destroying Australia and you are destroying Toronto and Montreal, and you must go.
Thane, I agree with everything you're saying. However, what boggles my mind is that if you look at the actual photos and the actual videos of who is rioting across the West, you'll see that there are plenty of white people, if we could call them white anymore.
But many of them are being paid.
I have to personally step back from that argument, and the reason
it doesn't make a difference. It doesn't make a difference whether they're paid or not paid. I agree, but what I'm saying is this: that you may have people chanting, but the violence is coming from Muslims.
Yes, the violence
all throughout Europe. I'm not saying you don't have far leftists who are extremists. Not saying. Okay. We've always had that, Marxists, but the violence, the bloodlust, the death cult, the killings in Toulouse of the rabbi and the children outside the Jewish day school, the torturing of Ilan Halimi in a suburb of Paris by, quote, a gang of barbarians. These were not French leftist intellectuals. These were immigrant Muslims. So if you look at where is the savagery coming from, if a car is being driven through a Christmas market coming up in the next few months in Germany, everyone knows behind the wheel was a Muslim. Everyone knows that they have never seen a Marxist behind the wheel. It's always a Muslim. Again, you could say, oh my God, Thane Rosenbaum is a racist. I don't give a shit what you say. You may not like You may not like the implications of what I'm saying, but it is what it is. And until you show me a Marxist running over Christians during Christmas, unless you show me a Marxist slitting the throats of people, I'm going to say the violence is a Muslim Islamist problem, and we have to at least acknowledge that truth. And if you don't, if you want to just pretend, oh, no, everyone loves each other, you can say that, Ben Affleck, but then you look stupid. You know, Ben Affleck, you know, on that many years ago, you may know that if you ever want to watch what a moron actually looks like, watch his mind blown on the Bill Maher show, because, you know, he didn't really, with Sam Harris, and because he just didn't understand. Yes, there's 1.6 billion Muslims or 2 billion Muslims in the world, but more than half of them, 3/4 of them, believe in a strict adherence to Sharia law. So while some will say, well, not everyone, of course not everyone, but if you believe in a strict adherence to Sharia law, you know what that means? You're in on the stonings, the beheadings, the dismemberments, the lashings, the burqas. You're in for that.
Yeah.
Right? So just because you haven't slit anyone's throat, I'm not blaming you, but you know that you're not upset by it. For instance, where were the imams in the United States supporting what happened on October 7th? Did I miss that?
You mean not supporting, going against it? Yeah.
Right. I'm supporting the hostages, calling for the return.
Right.
Where are the imams rejecting Hamas?
Right.
Where are the imams calling for the return of the hostages? Where are the imams talking about a peaceful coexistence between Jews and Muslims? Where are they? Shouldn't there? Where is the Martin Luther King? Where is the Mahatma Gandhi? Where is the Abraham Joshua Heschel? The fact that there isn't anybody is very telling. And again, you may say that's racist. It's not racist. It's just an observation, an empirical fact that they're not there. And if they're not there, we can only make one conclusion. They support what happened on October 7th. They think it was a good thing.
At the same time, to see how many non-Muslims have lined up in this anti-Semitic frenzy, I have to wonder if this weird indoctrination that just seems, especially in light of 9/11, just seems absolutely somewhere between impossible and totally psychotic. I'm wondering if this moment could have happened if it weren't for the internet with social media, because part of me thinks that, is it just inevitable? I mean, given the historical cycles of the anti-Semitism, I mean, is this really anything new under the sun, or did it just experience an accelerated exponential growth because of social media algorithms?
Well, that's for sure. You know, the failure of mainstream media, the repeal of the fairness doctrine, which used to require network news shows to be balanced, right? We don't have that anymore. You know, when I was a kid, I'm much older than you, more than 1/3 of the country watched Walter Cronkite for CBS News. I forgot what the number. Yeah, 1/3. I think that's right. 60 million. No one knew if he was a Democrat or Republican.
Right.
Right. Nobody knew. So yes, the internet, the failings of the media, mainstream media, the co-opting of the media, turbocharged this for sure. The algorithms, social media, turbocharged. But I'll go back to what I said before. The presence of Islamists in the West is what, in many ways, normalized the violence. Normalize the violence, where we're seeing violent behavior that was somehow accepted, overlooked, ignored, explained away on campus. You know, everywhere you looked, people said, oh, well, you know, it's free speech. Oh, well, it's academic freedom. Oh, well. And that is a function of Qatar, Iran, student visas from kids. You know, what Marco Rubio said about the student visas is true. If you came to the United States on a student visa to put on a mask and chase Jews around, you got to go. That's not what we gave you the visa for. If you're screaming for the death of Jews, you got to go, right? That's what you're here for. That's what it looks like. You don't seem to be studying. It's finals week and you're in the encampment screaming about killing Jews. So again, this kind of thing, a lot of it needs to be blamed at the feet of Islam and Muslims and Islamists who call for violence. And that's something that we're not being honest about. We're just afraid. We're afraid on multiple levels. But yes, you're also correct in saying that there was a time where there was no communication centers. There was no way to connect people. And now connections are instantaneous through social media. And you can build a critical mass very easy. And it doesn't help when a media personality, and so many of them have said things like Free Palestine, because many of these people have millions of social media followers and everyone follows them. That's what it means. They follow them and they don't know what they're doing. And again, that has made this different. The world has gotten shrunk and it also got stupider.
My question, honestly, isn't so much about the role that social media plays. Everybody knows what the role of social media. My question is that is the cycle of anti-Semitism inevitable, that every few generations the world will turn on the Jews, regardless, even if we were to be thrown back to the Stone Age?
Yes, you're right. Yeah, well, the answer is yes, Shana. You were once again correct. Let's talk about Hollywood again. What I said before, if Hollywood is controlled by Jews, how come they're not supporting Israel? Why did 4,000 people not be worried that they can sign that letter boycotting the Israeli film industry? Why are people wearing keffiyehs on red carpets or bloody red hand pins on red carpets? Well, during the Holocaust, the original 6 movie studios, 4 of them were headed by Jews. Of the 4, 3 of them were born in Europe and their relatives were being killed. Think about that.
Yeah.
Now, Germany was the second biggest market of films in the world. And Hitler in 1933 sent an ambassador to Hollywood and said, if you want to sell your films in Germany under the Third Reich, they better not criticize or make fun of Nazis or Hitler. And I am now going to look at all of your movies before they get released. And if I don't like something, I'm going to insist that you remove it. Now, 4 of the 6 studio heads all had European accents. They were Jews. So 3 of them were born in Europe. And they had relatives who were about to get slaughtered by Germany. You would think they would tell Hitler's ambassador, go fuck yourself. Go fuck yourself. They didn't. They didn't. They said, you know what? We have a board of directors we have to answer to. We have to make movies. We're in business. And we're going to let this guy tell us what movies. And that's why Hollywood did not act against Hitler. There's an example of something that happened. It looks like what it is today. Yeah. Steven Spielberg isn't acting against Hamas. And the Jews of Hollywood during World War II did not act against Hitler. So yes, that's a very good example. And in that instance, the proximity to the crime was much closer because they knew their own relatives were going to be slaughtered. They left behind relatives in those parts of the world. Yeah. Do you know the only person who stood up to that ambassador, by the way? The only person, great trivia question, Charlie Chaplin.
Okay.
Charlie Chaplin, who was not Jewish, who did marry a Jew, Paulette Goddard, her last name was Levy, Paulette Levy.
Yeah, I thought he was Jewish.
The great dictator. Mm-hmm. The only person that stood up to Hitler was Chaplin. So that's a very good example. Look, Hollywood in the 30s, Hollywood in 2022, 3, it looks a lot alike. They're
Yeah.
not going to stand up for Israel. They're not going to stand up for Jews, and they're not going to stand up for moral courage.
Yeah. You just actually gave me two pieces of trivia. I always thought Charlie Chaplin was Jewish. So anyway, so the word Holocaust has now come up over and over again for obvious reasons. There have been innumerable comparisons between October 7th and the Holocaust. I'm like, I also wasn't expecting to hear the word Hollywood as often as we just heard it. But anyone with knowledge of the Holocaust has honestly no plausible deniability for failing to recognize the danger in what's happening now all over again in its wake. So do you think that a lack of Holocaust education plays a significant role in facilitating?
No, I think that it just shows you the failings of humanity. The 1990s was the heyday of Holocaust history.
Yeah.
Schindler's List, Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C. Many documentaries won Best Oscar for Best Documentaries. Synagogues all over the country had Yom HaShoah events. Holocaust survivors were being filmed by Steven Spielberg and by the Fortunoff Foundation at Yale. The word Holocaust was being mentioned in cocktail parties everywhere. They were teaching Holocaust education, mandatory, small sessions in schools around the country. There were documentaries about kids, I think in Tennessee, non-Jewish kids, that collected 6 million paper clips. The movie was called Paper Clips. So there were lots of examples of the world focusing on what happened to the 6 million Jews.
Yes.
Now that was only in the 1990s, right? Then the 21st century happened, 9/11, and then that all stopped.
Right.
So that means if you were around, if you were alive in the 1990s, you don't have to be a Holocaust survivor. You have to just say, was I around from 1992 to 2000? Hundreds of millions of people were. And the answer is, were you not paying attention? Because that decade was filled with what happened to the Jews during the Holocaust. So you have to say, what kind of levels of amnesia? How much do people hate Jews that after all of the movies and documentaries and memoirs and oral testimonies and museums and Yom HaShoahs, after all of those, people looked at October 7th and said, I don't know, is that something I should pay attention to? I don't know, does that ever happen before? Like, how did people not make the immediate connection? And I'm saying, because they didn't want to. They didn't want to. It's not that they couldn't, they won't.
Yeah. Are you aware, Thane, that American schools right now are removing Jews from the Holocaust, and it's now just being taught as like a dark period in time where a lot of different people were killed? I
in
think
the spirit of diversity.
Yeah, but this is extremely dangerous. And the reason why I'm saying that there's been a lack of Holocaust education is you look at the youth, and the youth are the ones that have, like almost all of them support Hamas over Israel. They don't understand the parallels because they don't understand how Nazism rose in what
so you're now talking about people that were born after the 1990s.
No, when I say lack of Holocaust education, I'm talking. So here's what's interesting, Thane. So I'm 54, which means I was in high school at the end of the 1980s. Granted, I took all AP classes, so they were a lot more in depth. We never got to the Holocaust or World War II. We never learned about it. We didn't get that far in European or American history. And this was decades ago.
Well, no, but that's because that's what I said about the 1990s.
Yeah, history.
1990s was the heyday of Holocaust history.
That's right.
It didn't really exist. And actually, the word the Holocaust did not become part of the national vernacular until the late 1980s.
Yeah.
People don't remember. My parents are Holocaust survivors. They were called European refugees who survived the death camps. That's what they were called.
Wow.
That's what my parents, that's what people who my parents' generation, that's what they were called. It was only in the 1990s that we heard the word Holocaust survivor. The word Holocaust survivor would have meant nothing in the 1980s. So I'm saying, but it's not that long ago.
Yeah.
But, you may be right. Kids today don't learn it. Of course not. Because, it's not in schools, and white people are white oppressors, Jews are white, and you're not, it messes up the narrative, the categorical, clash between white and dark-skinned people.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't fit the story. Like, for instance, most people don't know that most Israelis are people of color.
Yeah.
Gal Gadot is a person of color. People that just don't want to hear that, but it's
They don't
true.
care.
So anyway, yes, education is important, but I don't think it makes a difference. It won't make a difference now. And I just think it goes back to something I've said to my students for many years. The Santayana famous quote, those who do not learn the lessons of history are doomed to repeat it.
Yeah.
That's a great quote, but it's nonsense. People repeat mistakes all the time. Everyone says, I'll never marry a guy like that again. And that's the next guy out of the box. They marry a guy just like that.
Okay.
If that was true, the 1990s, with all of those books, documentaries, oral histories, memorial services, Schindler's List, museums, if you look at the critical mass of what was going on for those 10 years, you would say that's an inoculant. That is like an injection into society, and there may be anti-Semitism, but there'll never be mass murdering of Jews. And obviously, Santayana is wrong, because that decade did not work.
The reason why I think the Holocaust education is so integral is that the indoctrination of the world that we're seeing, it's a slow burn. As I said, on October 7th, there was Rickford who made headlines for being invigorated. Now we have 300,000 people in Amsterdam being invigorated about 10/7. They don't see it happening because they've never seen it happen. So
But they have seen it happen.
But
they don't want to see the videos from October 7th.
Agree.
They have access to it. They don't want to see it.
I'm not talking about that. What I'm saying is, if you don't understand what occurred in the Holocaust and how subversive the process really was, then you can't see it happening to you because it's such a gradual.
Not if you have a lot of brown-skinned people living in Paris and Denmark and in Brussels and Madrid who are calling themselves oppressed from white people, Zionists. Who stole. Not if that's if you see a lot of people in London, London is a very dark-skinned city, and you're going to have very hard time telling a lot of people in the UK that Jews were victims in the Holocaust. They're going to hear a different story. Jews are oppressors that stole the land of Arabs. That's the story. And that is a very difficult story to rebut in this culture. Very difficult. When you see rock bands screaming about kill the IDF, and you're seeing, Hollywood actors wearing keffiyehs. I'm not sure Holocaust education at this point would make much of a difference. I don't think anyone would sit down for it. I don't think they would pay attention to it. I think they would call it propaganda. They would call it fake. I think it would be too unbearable for someone like you and me to watch people ignore that history. That we gave it to you again, we showed it to you again, and you rejected it. Why? Because what you're showing me will stop me from hating Jews. And I like it. I want the permission. And right now I have the permission.
So let me tell you something that is going to make you fall off your chair. So put on your seatbelt. I remember sometime in the 1980s when I was maybe in high school, junior high school, I don't know. My mom actually took me to hear Elie Wiesel speak. And after all these years, there was one thing he said that's literally stuck with me to this day. I'm telling you, this is going to shock the hell out of you.
No, I'm sure he told me this.
Uh,
I know what you're going to tell me.
Okay, well, let me say it anyway, because I don't know if I have told you this. Someone asked
No,
Ellie.
I'm saying he told me that.
Oh, okay. So let me finish my thought then, and then we could see if it's the same thing. And I'm amazed that he told you anything. Like all hell Thane. So someone in the audience had asked Ellie if there was a risk that the world would one day forget the horrors of the Holocaust, and even then as a kid, I was struck by his answer, which was no. He said that because the Holocaust is the most documented event in modern history, it was guaranteed to never be forgotten. Now, 40 years later, again in the throes of the internet and information age, do you agree with that assessment? I mean, the documentation
Ellie
is
would not
still
have said
there.
that. He would not have said that the last few years of his life. So I'm just telling you,
Yeah.
you were a very young kid and he was at a very different stage in his life. But I can promise you, because he's told me things. I thought you were going to tell me something else that he said.
Tell me what you thought I was.
But no, the last 10 years of his life, he would not have agreed with that. He would have said, given what he saw in Iran, given what he saw in the Second Intifada, given what he saw at the World Trade Center, he would not have agreed with that. Given what he saw in genocides after the Holocaust,
Mm-hmm.
the sheer number, they accelerated in
Yeah.
Congo, in
Yeah.
Sudan, and Cambodia, and Serbia, and Bosnia. No, he did not agree with that. He did agree with it originally because he thought we were building a strong historical foundation, a living record. What he didn't count on is that the hatred of Jews would exceed people's capacity to acquire the knowledge of something and say, well, I won't let that happen again. They're saying, I don't care what those books say, I'm going in this direction.
Yeah.
And by the way, the proximity between the Dreyfus affair and the Holocaust was only 2.5 decades. You would think that after the Dreyfus affair, that couldn't have happened anywhere. You would have said, well, there wasn't a mass murder in France,
Right.
but the world went anti-Semitic hysteria and it would never happen again. And it did. So I'm just not sure that that any of this works. I think that we've seen a long, long history of Jew hatred, and we're in a very bad period, and it will come to an end, and it won't be a great end. And I don't think we're at the end yet. And that's why it's very disheartening to see so few champions, because we're not even at the end. And we just don't have enough people that have signed up for the hard work of standing beside their neighbors.
I agree. And I guess that, so in this in post, it's funny because we do to a large extent consider this post World War II society, even though it was so many decades ago. It was such a defining moment for not just for the Jews, but for all of humanity. But with the benefit of historical record for those who are willing to look at it in a combination of that and hindsight, for a while, the world was able to recognize and understand that Hitler was, in fact, the very embodiment of pure evil. Like, we would use those two terms interchangeably, Hitler, evil. This acknowledgement, it really did, as we've discussed, led to decades of relative calm, and maybe a heyday, a golden age for the Jewish people in the West, particularly in the 90s. I would say Schindler's List was one of the most important pop culture events of that whole decade. But since then, universal condemnation of Hitler has somehow morphed into chants of Hitler was right, and Hitler should have finished the job.
Yeah, well,
Do you
that's anti-Semitism,
yeah,
right?
but do you believe though that in the years to come, because it did took years to write this after World War II. It's not like the day after everyone's like, oh no, never mind, we don't hate the Jews. But do you think that in the years or decades, I don't even know, to come, that a sense of moral perspective will be restored again? Or
Yeah, for a
you
short
do?
period of time. I think that, I don't
Okay.
know where this will end up, but I think that at some point sanity will return to the planet and people
Yeah.
will be more honest about what happened here. For instance, why were people, when there was a war, why were people using language about genocide? Why were they using genocide as the word instead of war crimes? Right? Why weren't they talking the language of war? War crimes, casualties of war, collateral damage. Those are the words that you hear in war. And instead, people ignored those words and used genocidal words, right? Well, that was clearly a conspiracy that the world bought into in order to justify the killing of Jews and to hunt them down wherever they are.
That's
No matter
right.
how whether they care about Israel or not, just
Yeah.
hunt them down wherever they might be. So, there is the hatred, the irrational hatred, the bloodthirsty hatred is, something we've seen before. And we're really watching it, played out in real time at a time when there is a Jewish homeland and Jews do have power, right? This is a very different time. Jews do have power and there is a Jewish homeland. And yet this is still happening.
Yeah.
You would think that there could not possibly happen. So, I don't think, I'm not hopeful, but I'm not surprised either. I mean, if you follow history, you see these patterns, and the conditions are here, that the world was predisposed, to blame the Jews.
Yeah.
And one last thing I would say about this, when you said about Hitler being evil, something was introduced into university culture called moral relativism.
Yes.
And moral relativism is a curse. It's a sickness. You know what it means? Cultures and societies are relative. None are better than others. We can't be judgmental. We can't be ethnocentric. We can't be imperialistic. Obama, what did he say? I don't really believe in American exceptionalism. Are you shitting me? Seriously? He didn't believe in American exceptionalism? I was shocked. Well, I wasn't shocked. That said a lot about him. You don't think America is exceptional? You look around the world, you don't see exceptional? Well, he is a product of this moral relativism. What makes Iran worse than America? What are you, stupid? You don't see the difference, Obama, between Iran and America? You think they're the same? So moral relativism has many looks, and one of them has this look. Now I'm going to say, do you have your seatbelt on?
Yes.
Who am I to tell someone not to cut off a head? They like it. It's in their culture.
Right.
They do it. The Quran and the Hadith said it's okay. Who am I to tell a person not to cut off a head? I don't want to be, I'm not that arrogant. So that kind of moral relativism is a sickness and has led to the levels of violence and the level of bloodthirstiness that we basically capitulated to the cultures of barbarism. That we said, well, live and let live. We like to eat cheese. They like to cut off heads. We're very different people. And it sounds funny, but this is what professors are teaching people on campus.
Absolutely.
They're saying that these are, imperialist, colonialist settlers. We're hearing this, the attack against high testing scores, the attacks against hard work, the attack against achievement, the attack against nuclear families. These are all examples of moral relativism.
Yeah.
Who's to say that it's better to grow up in a two-family house? Who's to say that hard work is a good thing? Hard work is what white people say, and that's evil. That's what white people do. Who's to say that merit should matter in whether I should get my job? I should get my job because of my skin color or my terrible circumstances or that my father was a crack addict, or whatever. That's what we're living in now. Identity and representation is more important than merit, right? Merit is not important. Merit is bad. What has Mondami said he's going to do? He's going to get rid of all the enrichment schools in New York City.
Yeah.
Right. I didn't make this up. He just said this a few days ago.
Yeah.
This is all the same kind of talk. Get rid of the enrichment schools. Merit, high achievement is for suckers. It's racist. It holds people back. And so this is another element that did not exist even during the Holocaust. You want to understand, how did it become so simple to happen now with the Jewish country and Jews in power? Some of it has to do with DEI and moral relativism and multiculturalism and political correctness and the politics of identity. These movements have paralyzed white centrists, liberals, democratic representative thinking people. Anyway, I think we ran out of time.
Okay, because I only have 25,000 more questions.
You'll invite me back.
Okay, let me ask one more.
Yeah, go ahead.
We keep pointing to Europe is already gone. I'm looking at America. Are we already gone? I mean, I sometimes I feel like we're putting our heads in the sand. I can't even go to
we gotta, if you're honest and if you hang out with Thane Rosenbaum, you get a lot of honesty. If you're honest and you've been reading me lately, you'll know that I'm saying, check out Dearborn, Michigan.
Yes.
Check out Paterson, New Jersey. See what happens in the next 5 years.
Check out
see how many other cities start electing entire city councils that are Muslims or Islamists, and see the movement toward Islamist Sharia law thinking. You saw what happened in was it Dearborn? No, I forgot what city it was. I wrote about it a few weeks ago, where someone was objecting, I think it was in New Jersey, to naming a street for a Hezbollah terrorist. And this was a man of faith, a Christian, not a Jew. The Christian said, I have a problem with, we're honoring a terrorist with a street naming. And the mayor said, I would like you to leave our city.
Yep.
I would prefer that you leave the city. That's the mayor of an American city who said, I would like to honor a terrorist by naming a street after him. And if you object to me, get out of my city. Yep. So do I think, I don't know. That was not a good sign. The minute you started seeing the burning of American flags in Dearborn and death to America, that was not a good sign. That looked to me like London, Paris, Madrid, Brussels, and Stockholm, and Toronto.
I agree. Are there any good signs?
No.
Okay.
I say no one ever invites me anywhere if they're looking for good news.
Yeah, well, I'll invite you because I'm never looking for the good news either. We could party in the corner together. Thane, I know you have a report to submit within just a few hours. Thank you so much for squeezing me in between Newsmax and CBS and all the other places that are vying for your time.
I think you're special, Shana.
Well, I think you're incredibly special, and thank you for always humbling me. I deeply appreciate it.
I'm always here to support your voice. If I can help project your voice and your ideas, I'm happy to do that.
Thank you.
Good night, everyone. Thank you, Shana.
Good night. I'm Israel-Hamas.
I'm Israel-Hamas. Thank you.
Bye.